What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to talk about the NBA possibly suspending the season. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it and subscribe to the channel as well for more videos just like this one every single day. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this conversation comes up because obviously in the NBA and life in general in the NFL, there are a lot of players that are missing games due to protocol issues. There are a ton of games as of yesterday getting postponed in the NBA, and this is continuing to be an issue, especially over the last month with a lot of players returning from Thanksgiving plans or seeing their family, whatever the case may be. It's been an issue, and so now this conversation comes up and this question comes up about what do we do about the rest of the season? Is suspending the season a possibility? What are the options here for the NBA? And unfortunately, this is a scenario we've already seen once before. The NBA suspended the season a couple of years ago. Then they did the bubble. And it almost does appear like we're approaching a similar scenario. So let's talk this out. So on one hand, there are obvious reasons to suspend the season. You have not only the health and safety of the players, but a ton of guys in protocols. You're already postponing a ton of these games. And the games that aren't getting postponed are barely NBA basketball games. I mean, you're watching teams play with a handful of rookies. Maybe one of their guys is still left standing, one of their top players. And then like 4 or 5 guys that had just gotten signed from a G League affiliate or something. Like it's barely NBA teams. It's basically like watching G League games. And these guys are trying, they're putting in good effort, but the product is obviously not the same. And especially as we're approaching potential Christmas Day games coming up, it's going to be a very, very weird slate of Christmas Day games if we're watching, Patty Mills against Malik Monk or something on Christmas. So there's a lot of reasons to start thinking about maybe we need to push the season back by 2 weeks, by a month. Let everybody, give everybody time to get out of the protocols, give everybody time to get healthy, and then you run it back, basically from the same point a couple of weeks from now. Now, the problem with that is logistically, there are just a ton of issues you have to deal with there. First and foremost being the schedule. This is the first time in 3 years the NBA has been on a normal schedule, going back to the first time they suspended the league. They actually are on a normal, this is when the trade deadline is, this is when the offseason is, this is when next year starts, all that stuff. This year is the first time since the season was suspended in the first place that we have been on a normal schedule. And so if you suspend the season 2 to 4 weeks, everything gets pushed back. The draft, the playoffs, the offseason, the trade deadline, free agency, the start of next season. And we've already kind of seen the negative impact of starting multiple seasons so quickly. We saw it last year, the beginning of last year, tons of injuries and stuff like that, because there was just no rest period. So continually trying to shift the schedule and move it might end up being a necessity, but logistically, it's way more difficult than just saying, hey, let's just push everything back 2 weeks. It's just, it's obviously a significant issue here. Now, on the other hand, in terms of why the league should not suspend the season, why should we just continue to do what we're doing and let teams play with 8 or 9 guys, half of them from the G League? Well, for one thing, if we're talking about postponement of games and having to deal with a lot of games being pushed back, the league it was way worse last year in terms of game postponements and things like that. I know in this moment there's a ton of games that are getting moved, but last year it was definitely worse. I mean, there were teams, I think Washington didn't play a basketball game for like 2 weeks, and they still were able to fit all those games in later and find a spot for them on the schedule and finish the season playing all the games. And I don't even think that we're at that point right now in terms of how bad things were last year. So if they were able to push through it last year, then the indication is that they'll be able to make it happen this year. Obviously, there are other reasons here to not do it. Quite frankly, the NBA wants their Christmas Day schedule to maintain the same. It's a big money day for the league, and they want every team to play all 82 games if they can help it. They have these big contracts in place for these teams to be playing that many games, and it's going to require a lot on the part of the NBA to turn around and say, okay, we're either going to push these games and move around our schedule, or we're going to push these games and just eliminate them from the schedule and play like a 72, 65 game schedule. That, from a monetary standpoint, is quite frankly just not that realistic for the NBA. I don't see a scenario in which they decide to do that, just because that's just nothing that we've ever gotten an indication from them that they would ever be willing to do. So there's a couple of things now branching off from those two sides of that conversation. One, it's likely, we've already seen some changes, and I think it's likely moving forward that we're going to see more when it comes to protocols for both players and fans. We've already seen Toronto cut down to 50% capacity. A lot of the teams, I'm sure, in the States will be cutting their capacity down as well. We've seen this movie before. And then for players as well, we've seen a variety of different protocol changes, whether it be in the NBA, in the NFL, at the state and local level. Quite frankly, there have been a lot of places that are kind of discussing how they can change things up, because there's going to have to be changes. I mean, I don't think this is a situation where the NBA can just continue to run things the way they have for the last couple of months and hope they can get through the end of the season. They're going to have to change some protocols. And then the other point from this that I cannot say with enough emphasis, there is absolutely 0% chance that we're doing a bubble again. I mean, I said this from the time that the first bubble ended. It's something that people continue to go back to whenever there's issues like this with possible, suspension of the season. But he's like, well, just go to the bubble, do a bubble for the playoffs. A bubble in the same instance that we had the first time is just not going to happen. Logistically, it was an incredible feat to put all that together and to make it work. The location is just not as available as it was before, so they would have to do it somewhere other than Disney because they're fully operating and they're trying to make money by having people stay at the resorts and things like that. Like that circumstance, that's something we're going to look back on in 10 years and be like, man, they actually did that. They actually had 20 teams from the NBA stay there for between a month to 3 months. They made it happen. They played the finals there and they were able to do it fully, safely, and completely. I just don't think that's something that they're ever going to explore again. There were too many issues with players being there for way too long, and they've talked about kind of the struggle of having to be in the bubble for 3 months and how much that impacted them negatively. Obviously not having fans in attendance for the finals. If the league can help it, even if it means 25% capacity at the NBA finals in Golden State or wherever, that's what they're going to do. I can't see a scenario in which the bubble becomes a realistic path here moving forward for the NBA. Unless it's like just for the finals to make sure that, the star players don't start missing games because of protocol stuff, I can't imagine that they're going to consider a bubble scenario in any way. So ultimately, here's where we're at with a possible suspension of the NBA season. It seems like the stance of the league to this point is, let's just try and make it work. Even if it's a little bit ugly, even if it's a little bit weird, even if we have to have guys from the G League playing for a couple of weeks and teams are playing with 8 and 9 players and it's not the best quality basketball product we can put on the floor. Hopefully we can contain this stuff. Guys can come back within 10 to 14 days. And then a month from now, none of this stuff is an issue. Now, I don't know how realistic that is, but ultimately that seems like the stance of the NBA to this point is they're not going to look to make drastic changes. They're going to, if you have 8 healthy players that are not in protocols, you're going to play. That's been their stance this entire time. And the only reason they have postponed more of these games recently is because more of these teams have been falling under that 8 healthy players threshold. So what we're probably going to see here is a couple of teams over the next week to 2 weeks missing games. The Nets have already had a couple of games postponed. I know there were a couple more postponed yesterday. And the league is going to hope for a 10 to 14 day window where those teams can return to play. The other teams that are not having those issues are going to continue to play their games as long as the other team is also healthy and ready to go. And that is going to serve as like a semi-suspension of the league, where the teams that are still eligible to play are going to continue to play. And the teams that are not are going to wait for their guys to come back out of protocols, and then they're just going to continue the season like normal. I don't anticipate a legitimate suspension of the league that's kind of like a semi-suspension where they have to push these games later on, and it's going to be tough on these teams late in the year in terms of the schedule of these games and how many games they're going to be playing and how many nights. But ultimately, time after time, right or wrong, the NBA has shown that if they have the choice to stop the season for a little bit and then have some of these same issues pop up in a couple of weeks, or put the teams at a bit of a disadvantage, not only in the present tense, but also into the future from a scheduling standpoint, they're going to choose to put those teams in a tough spot, have them deal with it, and then by the end of the year, nobody will remember anyway. So that's probably the path that we're heading towards here. And ultimately, like I said, even if they do choose to suspend the season for 2 to 4 weeks, there's no guarantee that these exact same issues that are happening right now wouldn't just pop up again in 2 to 4 weeks. And then you've already set the precedent of suspending the season when that does happen. And then if you don't suspend it the second time, then it becomes a whole thing. So ultimately, it's going to be like a a middle ground here where some of these teams are basically going to have a suspension to their season in the middle of the year for the next week to 2 weeks while they're waiting on some of their players to come back. They're going to miss a couple of these games. They're going to reschedule them later on. The rest of the league is going to operate like normal, and we're probably going to stay on a regular schedule the rest of the year. Now, the only scenario in which that would be different is if literally every team or 2/3 of the league was ineligible to play because they just don't have enough players. They've introduced new protocols to make it easier to have replacement players ready to go, so that doesn't happen, which again is an indicator of the NBA's idea here that they are just going to try and make it work, get to 8 players, and hope that in a couple of weeks everything is calmed down. I don't know how realistic of an idea that is, but in this moment, it doesn't seem like the NBA is going to be suspending the season. But yeah, that's going to be the end of today's video, and thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the box on screen. As I said, subscribe to the channel as well for more videos just like this every single day. With all this being said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Monday and a great start to your week, and I will see you all next time.